see so many different backgrounds here. A lot of people are working on data, design, and programming, which are three things that I really enjoy. So that's really awesome to see. So I did something new this year that I've never done before, and that was write an open source book about data with more than 50 people around the globe. So this was a new experience for me, and it was a whole lot of fun. And I'm going to start by just saying a little bit about myself. This is who I am. I'm a web nerd, and that means a lot of things. It means that I like to make things. It means that I'm in that sweet spot between design, code, and data. And that's where I've been for a couple of years. And what I do is I geek out on infographics. So a couple of years ago, I started a tech startup called InfoActive, and we build a web app for making interactive infographics and data visualizations. Yes?
Question. Do you plan to send the slides to us, or we should make notes?
I can send the slides. Or can we post the slides after? Sure. Yep. Yes, you'll have slides. Last year, I also did a fellowship with the Reynolds Journalism Institute. Their mission is to help journalists, and we thought that we could work together to make it easier for journalists to tell stories with data or provide resources for journalists. Together with RJI, RJI was really interested in this data design book that we've been working on since January, and so they're a sponsor of that project as well. And then more recently, in the past couple of months, I got together with a lot of really great folks in Montreal, and we started a data visualization meetup group, and that's been pretty successful. We've held our first couple of meetups so far. So that's my background. Basically, it's a way of saying that my entire life revolves around data visualization, and it's a lot of fun. So the way that I got into writing this book was we were starting a Kickstarter for my web app, InfoActive, and I received messages from people all over the place, but I received one message from a woman in Chicago named Diana, and Diana writes, "Hi Trina, Stats Dork from Chicago here. Do you have any plans to include tutorials for basic data cleaning and data selection techniques for users who may not have any statistics background?" And I said, Diana, that's a fantastic idea, because while we focus on the visualization side of things, there's not much that we do to help users understand whether or not the data they're putting into the system is any good to begin with. Is there selection bias? Is the data complete? Is it formatted in a way that we can programmatically understand? And it's a pretty big problem to solve. And I said, this is a fantastic idea. We're two people. How much can we do? What should we do? And so we started having a conversation. And because I love embarking on ginormous projects with random strangers, we decided to write a book. We also realized that this was a project that was valuable outside of the scope of InfoActive, and so we decided to make it a book that was free, open source, Creative Commons licensed, and platform agnostic, so that it's valuable regardless of what tool set you're using to visualize information. So we started this because we had this epiphany, and this epiphany was that, well, Diana came from a statistics background. She's taught a lot of statistics courses, and she was also a librarian. So she's done all of the research to try to find good resources for intro-level people getting into data and visualization. And what she found is that a lot of the textbooks or resources that cover more advanced data topics are usually written by people with PhDs and edited by people with PhDs in statistics, and not really edited for general audiences. And so there are some data resources out there that are more of a beginner level, but they don't cover the complex topics. So what we wanted to do, our real mission with this, was to make a guide that didn't dumb it down, but took the extra work to explain the hard stuff in a way that's friendly, conversational, approachable, and something that a designer could go to, a designer who says, I'm not a math person, can go and read this content and feel like this is for me. This is something that I can really relate to. It's about math and data, but I feel really welcome reading this content. So that was our mission from the get-go. And we also had these conditions. We wanted it to be free. We wanted lots of different perspectives and views to come into this. We wanted it to be Creative Commons licensed, and we wanted it to be open source. And so all of these things presented unique challenges. I hadn't ever coordinated an open source project of this size before, so it was a really interesting learning experience for me. And the funny thing is that as far as I can tell, there's no open source book on how to write an open source book, which I know is crazy. So we had to think a lot about how we were going to coordinate this project and make it work. So we started out with an application. We put together a Google form and we tweeted it out. We sent it out on Facebook. We sent it to our email networks, and people started sharing it around the globe. And we were amazed when we started seeing these applications pour in from all over the world. We had over 100 people fill out our application to be part of this project. And we were looking specifically for two different groups of people. Technical people who had training and knowledge in math and statistics and data, and people that had absolutely no training in those subjects. We really wanted those folks to read over the entire book and say, this makes sense to me, or this doesn't make sense to me. I'm not a math person. I don't understand this. Please rewrite it in a way that this feels good for me as a reader. So that was really important to us, to have a range of different voices contributing to the project. So we received all of these applications, and we kicked off the project with a write-a-thon in Chicago. So we brought a few speakers together, and we held the event down at Blue 1647, which is a community space down in Pilsen. And we got together, and we sat down, we started writing, and tried to figure out how it was that we were going to work on the rest of this project. And then Diana and I sat down the next day for an entire day, read through every single application and all the comments fields, which were amazing. And we started looking at the list of chapters and sections that we wanted in the book, and started trying to figure out who would be best for what different sections. And then we started emailing people and asking, hey, are you still into this? Would you be willing to write this chapter? Would you be willing to serve as an editor in this capacity? And because we had so many people, we also created project managers to manage each section, which made the whole process much smoother and easier for us to manage, because it is difficult to keep a group of 60 volunteers all on the same page and as a cohesive unit. We also set very clear expectations from the beginning. We had a Google site that we used to organize the whole process. We used Google Docs because they're free and most people are familiar with how to use them. We also created writing style guides to set forth some expectations. Here's the direction of the book. Here's what we're trying to accomplish with it. We want the language to be friendly and approachable, and this is how we plan to do that, so that even though we wanted the unique voices of all of the writers to shine through, we also wanted it to have a cohesive voice at the same time. So that really helped to make sure that the project ran smoothly. This is my favorite page in the book. It's the contributors page. We ended up with a lot of amazing people. We had NASA engineers, we had neuroscience PhDs, we had documentary filmmakers and artists and journalists and professors. We had an amateur cat yodeler on the team. And if any of you ever have the chance to work with an amateur cat yodeler, based on my experience, it's a really positive experience. They're just absolutely phenomenal to work with. So I highly recommend that. This is all of our contributors as one. I really like seeing all of them together. And of course, there's always this guy who's on any project. They blew my mind. They were absolutely amazing. Yeah, so something I learned in the course of doing this project is to never underestimate the awesomeness of strangers on the internet and the no-fears, especially those strangers who volunteer to write books about data in their free time. Those are good people. We also, I was amazed throughout the project at little things that the contributors did that really made my day. For example, I had a lot of kind of grunt work tasks that I felt really guilty assigning to certain contributors because they all had such amazing experiences, and I didn't want anyone to have to work on these grunt work tasks. But there was one contributor in particular who was extremely intelligent and had a lot of extra free time during the week. And so I said, maybe I'll give it a shot and see what she does with it. And so I gave her this task of we had a lot of data tables in different formats. We had them in Google Docs, Word docs, Microsoft Excel, and Google Sheets. And we had to turn all of these tables into HTML tables for the book. And so I found this little tool online where you could cut and paste, and it kind of made the process easier, but it was still, that process times 60 tables in these different formats. And so I handed it to her, and I kind of cringed and felt bad. And then 2 days later, she said, you know, I looked at this project and I thought that this might be a good time for me to learn Python. Why not? so she figured out how to create a script to generate these tables for us, and I was so super impressed, extremely pleased by this, and she wasn't bored and didn't feel bad about doing this grunt work because it gave her the opportunity to start learning Python, which is awesome. Another example would be I had more kind of little tasks, and one of our contributors from Australia would reach out every now and again and say, hey, do you have something for me? Do you have anything for me to work on? And I'd give him things. And then at one point he emailed and he said, oh, and by the way, please feel free to send me all of the really tedious little grunt work tasks that you have, because I'm over in Australia and I can work kind of as the second shift during the night. And I said, okay, and I sent him some, and sure enough, first thing to the next morning, he had finished it, super happy about it. It was really awesome to see. And then this was a chapter that was particularly hard. We had an email chain going for about a month. There was a whole process of putting it together from basically audio files that had to be then transcribed, that then had to be edited to sound like they were written rather than spoken, and then examples that had to be redone. And we had this huge email thread that lasted over a month. And one day I open up my email and I see the chapter wearing a birthday hat. And one of the contributors decided that since the thread was a month old, she would celebrate by taking some of her free time and going into Photoshop and turning the chapter into a chapter with a birthday hat. So I thought that was really amazing, and I was really happy to work with people that did things like this. After we had finished writing and editing, doing most of the editing for the book, and each of the chapters went through several rounds of revision with different types of editors going through it. We used a tool called O'Reilly Atlas to take those Google Docs and turn them into a book. And so O'Reilly has created a tool that basically allows you to generate PDF, HTML, EPUB, and Mobi all with the same HTML files, and it syncs up really nicely with Git. So basically it's a WYSIWYG in the browser that our contributors who were not familiar with writing HTML could use to edit the content, and then it would sync up with our GitHub repo and allow whoever wanted to work in HTML and Git their ability to do that, and people that really had no idea what that meant and just wanted to edit the text, they could do that too, and it worked really nicely together. And then at the end, it's literally a Ruby gem, so we just build the book and you're done. And the book, this is how it ended up. This is the book homepage, and you can read it online as HTML or you can download as PDF. We do not require you to enter an email, so it's just a click through. And then there's a little bit of content about how and why we started. And also this Get Involved section. There's a form here that people have been using to report a misplaced comma in the second image on chapter 17. I thought we had so many people read through and edit it, but it's amazing what you'll find when you unleash it to the world and ask them to contribute, which is one of the strengths of the book as well. We could have been very perfectionist about it, but at a certain point we just wanted to release version 1, and I think it actually makes people happy to be able to contribute in that way. Say, oh, I found the misplaced comma in the second image in chapter 17, and I can report that and I can then contribute to this project. So I think that's been really neat, and people have also been using this form to contact us about writing new chapters or contributing to editing processes in the future, or contributing to other language versions of the book. And, oops. And the rest, yeah, so then we also put the project on GitHub. So it's open sourced and anyone can contribute to it. And the wonderful thing about unleashing it is that people do contribute to it. On the first day it was up, we already had a pull request of someone adding arrow key support between the chapters, which I thought was awesome. There's 600 things that we could have taken the extra time to build, but it was much nicer to see those things kind of coming into the main project after. And we also have the book is also being translated into different languages now. We already have a group that's formed in Montreal, and they're working on translating it into French and also adding culturally relevant examples, taking some of the examples throughout the book that have to do with geographic location or certain topics that are related to North American or European audiences, and turning those into more specific culturally relevant examples that are closer to the culture of Quebec or France. And we also have a Spanish language version that's being built right now. There are other chapters in the works. We weren't able to get all of the chapters into the first iteration of the book because there were some that just simply weren't done, and we thought it was more important to give this to the world early rather than wait until everything's perfect and all of the chapters are in place. So we have some upcoming chapters as well. Some of the chapters that you can see, if this will load. This one's a very popular one called Perception Deception. So talking about how we perceive differences in color and contrast and how that affects the way that we perceive the underlying data. Talking about color scales. It talks about why not to do 3D charts, I believe. Yeah, that's a beauty example right there. And there's also, there's all of these different sections. So we have 5 sections. At first we talk about the data fundamentals, so talking about different data types and what it means to have aggregated data versus raw data. We talk about the data collection process, data preparation and cleaning, visualizing the information, and then a couple of chapters on things to watch out for, things to avoid. And that's about all I have for the book itself. I want to open it up to questions. How much time do I have?
Oh, you're good.
Okay.
Like 10 minutes or so.
Okay. Yes.
First of all, I just want to say that this is really, really impressive, and I think it's amazing that it was successful. So I guess my question is like, because I work a lot in local politics and do organizing, for example, so I work with all volunteers a lot, and it is so hard to get effective coordination on anything, let alone writing a freaking book.
Mm-hmm.
So any, anything, any experiences you learned from that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so I mean, that is a big issue, and I thought it was going to be a very big problem starting out on the project too, because I also have experience working on volunteer-run projects, and they have, in my experience, they've always been very difficult. I think something that we did really well was we held very clear boundaries, and we set very clear expectations from the beginning when we expected to have the first chapters in, and what we expected those chapters to look like. Having the style guides go out to the writers in advance and having specific job descriptions for each of the editors that were contributing helped a lot for us, but I think it also helped the people contributing as well, because they felt like they had a very clear direction. No one wants to join a project and feel really wishy-washy about what their role is. So it really helped in that sense. The other thing that I found, we had over 100 people apply to begin with, but you'll notice we only had 55 or so contributors on the end page. And I think that's pretty typical and pretty normal. I was expecting a pretty high dropout rate. In the very beginning, when we started sending emails out to contributors, if it took them a week to respond, they were out of the project, because it was going to drain a lot of our resources to try to chase people down again and again. And we tried to get no's from people as quickly as possible, checking in and making sure that they had time. And if they didn't have time, it was okay to cut their chapter, assign it to someone else. For example, there were a couple people that had babies during the project. So one person had twins and dropped out for a while, understandably, but it was good for us to have communication with him and him saying, okay, I'm not going to be able to help you out during this time. And that was extremely helpful. And like I said, there were a few chapters that we had to cut at the end because they weren't ready yet. And I think that's just part of the process. But one thing that I found with this project is that there were 5 people, I think, that just went above and beyond every expectation I could have had, and those people really pulled it together. We had one guy who stepped in and just owned the repo, and that was really wonderful to have, and he's still there coordinating, taking the pull requests and fixing the errors that are being reported, that kind of thing. And I think the key part for me was to find those specific people that were pulling the majority of the weight. And we've added little stars to their bios on the contributor page because they're awesome. So just very quickly identifying who's going to be the rock star and who might be unreliable over time was something that really helped us. Yes?
I think he raised first.
Oh. Who?
Scott.
Hey.
Yeah, quick. So I was just curious how much like traction you've got, like how many downloads, and how you advertise something like this without any source of income or whatever. You know, I mean, I'm looking for a book. I usually like go to Amazon.com or whatever. And so how do you reach people, and how have you guys done so far reaching people?
To be honest, I don't know exactly how many people have read it or visited it at this point. The last time I checked, it was around 17K uniques, and we released it at the end of August. So it's gotten some good traction. People are still tweeting about it pretty much every day. I mean, it definitely was a spike right when we first launched it, and everyone was excited, and they were sharing it with their teams and sharing it on Twitter. A lot of the traffic has come through social networks and just organic growth, which has been really nice to see. We did try to do a little bit of press outreach at the end, but PR is not really my forte. So I might have dropped the ball on that a little bit. We got a few articles out there, but the majority of it just came through organic traffic. Yes.
So your project obviously is really interesting and it's a big accomplishment. But at the end, you produce a book. So who would you say is your intended audience?
Good question. When we started, it was more geared toward graphic designers, right? We were noticing that a lot of graphic designers claimed to be math phobic or data phobic, or would say, oh, I'm a designer, I can't do math. And for one, I think that's bogus. I think that designers can do math, and I think that math people can do art, and I'd love to change that perspective. And so that was kind of the mindset going into it, but you know, it did become more of a broad audience as we went. About half the book is really geared toward working with data, and the other half is really geared toward working with design. And I come from a little bit more of a design background than a data background. But my co-organizer, Diana, definitely comes from a data background. And in the final sections of the book, she said, yeah, everyone that I work with needs to know this information. This isn't just for designers. This is also for data people. They need to know about the design principles, fonts and colors and iconography, and how to visualize information and things to think about in the design. So I'd say that the core intended audience are people who want to work with data more and might not feel quite comfortable knowing where to begin and need a friendly introduction. But I'd say that different chapters are applicable to a range of different audiences.
Okay, so how to work with data and then how to present the data, not only to understand it, but how will be the best way to present it.
Exactly. Yes.
Do you have a 3D visualization?
We have a section of the book dedicated to explaining why not to do 3D pie charts and 3D bar charts.
I'd like to volunteer to add another chapter to challenge that notion.
Please get in touch on our
translate to Chinese.
All of the above, please. Yeah, get in touch. We welcome all critiques and feedback. Yes.
So would you, after doing this, do it again? And if so, how would you do it differently? If at all.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I do have an answer to that. Yes, I would do it again. It was so valuable. I'm excited that the project's continuing. I've taken a little bit of a break since publishing it, but there are some chapters that are in the pipeline that I'd really like to finish, and I'd love to see the French and Spanish version. And there are other people thinking about Mandarin. I don't know if that's the Chinese that you're thinking
Mandarin
about.
just a dialect. It has the same written format as the Cantonese and any other dialects. Yes.
Yeah. So Mandarin might happen. German might happen too.
There's for a traditional font, which is in Taiwan and Singapore. I cannot do it, but people can, so that's not a big deal.
But the thing that I would definitely do differently if I had to do it again is that a lot of the editors were too nice, right? When you're working on a project with a bunch of strangers, you want to be nice. And the people that ended up really helping us at the end in an editing capacity were actually a group of people that we had assigned as marketing or distribution contributors, right? Because we had more contributors than we had roles for in the book. And so we decided to have a group of marketing or distribution people. And then toward the end of the project, we started having a series of conference calls with these people to talk about their specific projects. And something we hadn't done with the other editors was have conference calls to bring everyone together and have them get to know each other. And what happened when we started having these conference calls is they became really comfortable with each other and started feeling like they had more ownership in the project. And so when they started digging into the book and we realized that they might be useful as editors as well, they actually became some of our most valuable contributors. And it wasn't because the other contributors weren't good, it was because we had built this relationship with this particular group of people that made them feel more comfortable really digging in. So I'd say that a lot of the chapters weren't edited as heavily as we would have liked in the first part of the project. So from the beginning, if I had to do it again, I would put in that extra effort to get small groups of people on conference calls really working closely together and give them permission to give those harsh critiques and be really upfront about their thoughts from the very beginning. Yes?
Yeah. Is this book, is it done, or is there just like a Disney World? It's never going to be complete. There'll always be another chapter. How is that set up?
Yes. Yes. Version 1 is complete, and there will be iterations moving forward. You know, there have been little typos changed since we released version 1, and there are other parts of it in the works. Yes.
I was wondering, what do you think are the weaknesses of an open source book compared to a regular book? For example, do you have running examples? You know, the same example used in different chapters to illustrate different aspects of it?
We tried to have that consistency as much as possible. So there's a theme, a recurring theme throughout the book of using food. And we use that example specifically because we wanted to avoid controversial examples. It's really easy to pull up data sets that have to do with politics and controversial topics, or say disease or death rates. And we wanted people to focus on the content of learning about data rather than a really controversial topic, whether or not they agree with it, how sad it is, how depressing it is, how angry it makes them feel. We wanted to avoid those kinds of emotional examples. So we did make sure that the different examples throughout the book followed that format. To the extent that we could, we used food, we used coffee. There are other examples that are not food and coffee, but for the most part, we changed them when they were really depressing, say things like deaths from cigarettes. And we changed one example that was kind of fun about tequila, but we wanted it to be for a more PG audience, and we wanted teachers to feel comfortable using it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Were there any, do you think that the approach has weaknesses in the quality of the book that you come up with?
Oh, right, the open source versus a non-open source book. Yeah, I'd say it was a tremendous amount of work to organize an open source book because most contributors were only working on it for a few hours, right? The super contributors who ended up putting in a tremendous number of hours were extremely valuable. There is a certain amount of time investment to work with additional people. When you have one person who's perfect for the job and they understand it well and they can put in 40 hours a week and they understand the context of everything else that's going on in the book, there's definitely an advantage to that. And stringing together all of the different chapters, making sure that we're not repeating things throughout the chapters, that was something that we had an additional amount of work that we had to do as well, because a lot of authors wanted to talk about how terrible it is to use pie charts, but there was only one section in the book that was talking about the controversy of pie charts, right? And we didn't want the same idea repeated multiple times when it didn't quite fit into that chapter. So there was extra work in that process. But I mean, the advantage, I think, of the open source book as opposed to a non-open source book is that now we have thousands of people editing and reviewing it and giving, not thousands of people have filled in the little form on the homepage, thankfully, but we have lots of people looking at it and thinking about contributing and adding to it over time, and that's more than I could do, for sure.
How about it from the reader's point of view? Does the reader, will the reader be able to make out the difference between a regular book and an open source book?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Maybe one more question.
Yes, one more question. Yes. Yeah.
How many, if anyone, people or organizations have approached you about how you went about doing this and how they could do it for another subject, another topic?
Good question. Well, it was only released at the end of August, so it hasn't been out for a very, very long time. I think I've only had one inquiry from another woman in Chicago who's putting together a book about data, and I'm not sure if her book is going to be open source or not. So not a lot, but I've been thinking about writing a post about the process of putting together an open source book, and maybe writing that open source book about that's
yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's
okay.
it. But thank you.
Okay.
This is great.
Thank you.